Thank you, Jeff. Well, I've told my story so many times, but I've always mined my story for the gags. Being a comedian, that was the point. But this time I'm telling the same story, but I've been able to find, instead of looking for the gags, I've been able to find nuggets of truth, of what I missed out on, what I didn't see, mistakes I and others made. So I'll start at the beginning. I didn't know I was an alcoholic until my late 30s. It was when I first put my hat in the ring for the national comedy circuit. Prior to that, I'd been, the funny one as a kid and in my family and with guests, particularly with guests around the table late at night in Alice Springs. And I'd started to feel, the embarrassment of going too far in conversation and waking up, not just with a hangover. The thing that alcoholics suffer from with their hangovers is they're as equally excruciating on your soul. The regret, the disbelief of what can come out of your mouth. I remember one Saturday morning and my husband wasn't happy because apparently I told his best friend's wife that their baby looked just like Laurie Oakes, and and it's true, and it was a girl, so that's a shame. But stuff like that, it ceases to get funnier. And I remember a very good friend of mine who had no other reason than to tell me the truth. And it was the first person who had told me a truth so blunt as this one. He not only had lived experience, he was experiencing still the life of being a near 30-year heroin addict. And we were having a drink. This is before I came out as an alcoholic. He's another comedian. And we were just talking. And he looked at me dead in the eye and he said, Fiona, you used to walk into the Peter Cook Bar, which is where all the comedians gather during the Melbourne Comedy Festival. And he said, you'd walk in and the party had started and it was so much fun. And we knew, the laughs were going to be hard and heavy. And then he said, over time I've noticed that it's all getting shorter every time. You're still funny at the start, but your stories are getting repetitive. The really funny you is getting shorter, and then quite frankly, you're becoming really boring. And it was a bit to take in, but I wasn't particularly offended because that's the way comedians roll. And I've got to say, I've always felt very supported in my comedic family, my carnival family I call them, because so many of them in a green room have lived experience of drug or alcohol issues. All of showbiz does. So while my family thought that they were the ones leading me up the garden path, it was quite the opposite. And when I say that your friends and family can be the most dangerous people to be around, it's like the opposite of the adage, ignorance is bliss, because ignorance is killer. I remember my first New Year being sober. It wasn't a sobriety I kept, unfortunately. I am sober now as of November 2019. Anyway, it was an attempt at one of my first sober New Year's, and I was happy to be the driver, as was everybody else. I come from big drinking stock. And my parents were going to their annual shack not their shack, but to visit friends, where they went every year since I was this high. And it's only 13 miles from where they live. And I said, I'm happy to drive you there. And on the way there, I asked Dad if he could ring me when it's time for them to go. And he said, no, no, no. No, we always leave at 12:30 on the dot, straight after the fireworks. There's no need to ring. We'll be out the front at 12:30. And I asked again, because I was worried. But, you know, he's my dad. He's the boss. But he wasn't the boss, nor should he have been, of what I needed that night. And this is what I've learned. You've got to be the boss of your own risk-taking. And this was a risk, because sure enough, it comes to 12:30 and I haven't had a call, but I wasn't expecting a call because Dad said they'd be there ready on the dot at 12:30. And I got there and went inside the house to find 8 very drunk octogenarians and me. And I was stuck there for 3 hours. And the danger was that I was in such early sobriety and there was booze everywhere. And it wouldn't have taken much for me to hide a bottle or even sneak a drink in front of them. And people would think that's not a big deal. But it's such a big deal to an alcoholic. Because you can't get drunk unless you have the first drink. That first drink can be fatal. I've learnt more and more as I've grown, and I've made more and more mistakes that I've talked about. But I'd like to tell you about the lowest place, well, the lowest public place I went. And that was my rock bottom. My sister still laughingly refers to it as the incident. And that's when I fell asleep on stage in front of 400 people at the Queensland Performing Arts Centre. Nodded off. Bored myself. I laugh on stage. But it was such an excruciating thing to happen. And I was in blackout when I hit the stage. What had happened was I'd done the same show the night before, but I'd only had my usual, heart starters of 3 standard drinks in me, which is apparently the exact amount I needed to give a perfect performance, which I believed, because alcoholism in its cruelest form is a liar in the shape of yourself. Anyway, I had an all-nighter and then didn't know what to do with myself, so I topped up all the next day because I'd caught up with friends after the show the night before. For whatever reason, I went on stage with an alcohol reading of 0.4, and the next thing I remember, I was in a hospital bed. I remember thinking, I don't remember buying a 90 that does up at the back. I had no idea what had happened. And there's my manager, and then it all started coming together, the truth of what had happened. And this is the moment, well, not that exact moment, but it was later that day that I went public to Australia, because the media were on to a comedian that had fallen down 20 minutes into a show. And I also knew that there were 400 people in the audience who could well tell the difference, because my agent and the media, well, my agent in Channel 7 had suggested I run with exhaustion. As so many celebrities do, we get very exhausted many times, many of us. And I just couldn't do it to myself, to join the throng. And also because I knew there were 400 people there who could tell the difference between a drunk and an exhausted woman. What really shocked me about that time, I've not spoken of it before, but I remember hearing my sister-in-law's fury as she spoke to my husband about what had gone down. I couldn't actually hear the words, he was on the phone, but it was fury, as if I did it myself. And I guess that's what non-alcoholic people think. And we always seem to do it at the worst time. You know, the weddings and funerals and grandmother's 80th. But that shocked me. And there was much, much more of that to come. The problem was that I'd gone full exposure. I'm an alcoholic. And I had no idea what an alcoholic was. What's so important about family being educated first is so that people like me never swim alone again like that again. My husband didn't even understand what alcoholism was, and he just presumed that I'd become incredibly selfish and didn't care about him or his reputation. And years of that ensued. Eventually I left my husband and started up again in Melbourne. I went to AA a lot, and I understand two things that the two fellas that wrote the big book came across. It's like the two guys who stumbled across penicillin. It's pretty simple. What we do know is that an alcoholic must, for their life's sake, always keep in contact with others with lived experience. People with lived experience are our lifeline. And that's one thing at least I got from AA. I won't go into my opinions of AA, but I do think that was a magical find. Moving on through my list of disgraces, the next one was absolutely shattering. And it was when I was doing a corporate one night in Canberra, and I had things in place so that I could keep myself safe. I'm a codependent, which I didn't even know what that was. And my codependency means I can't let anyone down. Their feelings hurt me as much as they hurt them. So I threw away the protocol that was so important to me after every gig. And that was to have a driver come and pick me up immediately after the gig. And also to only stay 20 minutes, no longer, and mingle. Because I knew how to be on stage after a while. I knew more how to be on stage than anywhere in life. But I got off stage this night and a judge wanted to meet me, and the guy who had organised the night had cancer. Well, you know, his cancer, of course, was my cancer, and his worries, of course, were mine. And if he wanted me to meet the judge, it had to be done. But the danger was, and it's very much like that film Flight, where Denzel Washington, I love that movie, whoever wrote that movie knows an alcoholic or is one. But it's when the character Denzel Washington was playing, before the biggest day of his life that he had to be sober, he finds alcohol, and it's in a hotel room, and it's in a fridge, and it's vodka, which was my poison, and he's about to grab it. And anyone who's alcoholic, hearts were in our throat, don't do it. And he did it, and that was the end of that. Anyway, so similar to this, on my way to meet the judge, no kidding, a whole tray of champagne glasses filled to the top, all of them, and there would have had to be 80, if not more, neat little champagne glasses. This is in the bowels of Parliament House. And it was just too much temptation, because you see, I also by now had an obligation to be witty and funny in front of the judge that wanted to meet him. I couldn't bear the thought of him meeting white-knuckling, you know, boring Fiona. So I risked my life. I helped myself to 3 or 4 on my way to the toilet, and I think I downed 5 or 6 on the way back. And then a group of girls, I met the judge, and there were people everywhere. It was a big event at Parliament House, and a group of girls were heading off into the city to kick on. And they said, "Come along, Fiona." And I said, "Oh, no, I'm not, I don't drink." And they said, "Oh, Jenny drinks. She'll drink orange juice with you." And I said, "Okay," because I'm already flying by now. And I thought, this is an excuse. It's too late. The horse has bolted. I'm not in control anymore. It's like I've handed the keys to my life over to the universe. Anyway, so out I go with these women. We had a lovely time, apparently. And I was paying a waiter $20 or $50 a go to put vodka in my orange juice. And this is all so no one would find out I'm a fraud and not interesting. The madness of it still stuns me. But I think back of that waiter, God, I hope he was doing it hard at uni and didn't have enough cash. I reckon he made 800 and, no, not that much. He made a pile of money. Now I'm in blackout, because that's the last thing I remember. And now I have just flashes of memories come in and out. I remember sitting in the gutter with a very young couple, giving them my slurred wisdom on life. That's just one flash, and then the next flash is an ATM and drawing out too much money, way too much money. I just see an ATM and too much money. And then the next memory is waking up in bed with someone on me and someone in me, and the horror of the truth of what I was in that moment was too much for me. I passed out. And then when I woke up, well, I've written about it in my book, but when I woke up, my first instinct was to save myself. You know, I didn't know if he could be a dangerous man. He didn't look threatening. But I figured, and I've always figured, if you were ever in this situation, drunk or not, you'd always act. Like, I always thought if I got kidnapped, I'd just act as though I was supposed to be kidnapped and be their friends immediately. So I was very friendly to this fella and talking very naturally while I'd answered the phone to my husband and lied through my furry teeth. No, I haven't missed my flight. No, of course I haven't. No, I'm not drinking. Hung the phone up. Well, it didn't hang up properly. And my husband listened in to all of this conversation. I had to get through something big. That was a ball. A ball for the Pink Ribbon Foundation in Adelaide, which my husband was joining me at. So all that's a blur of guilt and horror, and all I knew was that I had to get through the ball, the emceeing duty, and then I could make a plan to kill myself. Thankfully, a failed suicide attempt later, I reached out to my sister and got help. You know, that's the saddest thing, I think. It saddens me all the way to my core that so many alcoholic deaths are shamed. We die of shame. I once saw, it was years ago, it was a gravestone in the top end of the Northern Territory. And it was carved out years and years ago, the headstone, in the middle of nowhere. And because I'm an alcoholic, I could read between the lines. I think I could. And it read, This man may have lived a better life had he ever known the love of a woman or the warm, sweet kiss of a child. I thought, oh, there you go. Somebody's mother wrote that for their alcoholic son. I could be dead wrong. One of the, I think the hardest things that I made life hardest for myself is only giving my information to people who were as ignorant as me, people who loved me, but so many opinions, you know, from people in a family as big as mine, particularly from people that you really regard. Like, I remember telling an uncle that I knew, you know, so well, and he was like king of the barbecue. I think he was a pilot, but you'd always defer to him. And after I told him my story, he said, oh, well, dear, it all sounds pretty rough on you, but promise me, just so long as you never let anyone deny you your favourite Merlot from time to time. You don't get it. And that used to happen all the time. They don't get it. It's not their fault. They don't get it. They keep not getting it. And I didn't know how to explain it. And then it becomes this, well, I'd set my whole family up, all of them, to be very disappointed when I relapsed. So I'd kind of orchestrated a pretty horrible world for myself, whereby if I drank, it was bad, and I was to be cold-shouldered, and for some reason, it was handed to everybody. The news, she's relapsed again. I've got a huge family. The more people that know, the harder it is to get back on the wagon after a relapse. That's something if I could change anything, that would be top of the list. So as I went on living this way, I saw a psychologist and a psychiatrist, but I almost don't trust people who haven't been through this themselves. That sounds terrible, but I think I was lying, even though I didn't know it, because I believed every relapse was the last. So if I was between relapses, I only really showed a very hopeful and together part of myself. That fell apart when I eventually fell apart, and ended up where this disease takes us. As they say, alcoholism, active alcoholism only has 3 endings, and that's death, institution, or jail. And I pretty much went to all 3 places, although I was only in the lockup for, it was I got a bit lippy on a Virgin flight. Not funny, but I've no memory of it. But the truth is, there I was, nearly dead in a bed, and all my children having to see that, and the guilt and the shame in their faces. Oh my God, when they came to the room. It was an accidental, it wasn't even a suicide attempt, but then again, I'm hardly a reliable witness. But I believe it was a leaking heater, a leaking carbon monoxide heater in my apartment. But I was unconscious and wasn't able to speak for myself. Even after that, I was still in crazy, not denial, just this inability to understand fully all the way through that I had to smash the idea dead, smash it dead, that drinking was not possible for me, that drinking would kill me without certainty. Or is it without any uncertainty? I've lost a few marbles from that coma. I don't mind admitting that. And then things got terribly sad. When I think back on it, I was in a coma for 2.5 weeks, and then I spent about 4 months recovering in a psych hospital. And there I was safe because there were people with lived experience anywhere I wanted to look. Alcoholism is a mental illness as much as anything. And there were plenty of me in the place I was in. It wasn't until I came out into the real world again, and I moved to Adelaide to stay with my cousin. I thought that would be a softer entry, staying with my cousin. You know how cousins aren't as quick to yell at you as your sisters? So I stayed with my beautiful cousin Meg, and I was starting life again. I had not a penny. I had one pair of boots. I literally had nothing but the clothes I stood up in. And 2 days later, I was found fully clothed, in my boots, drunk as a lord, in a bath filled to here. How embarrassing. Like, the humiliation of it was, but by then, I remember once one of my boobs was exposed at a chemist shop, and I was with my sister, and the person across the counter said, "Sorry, one of you, I just had a hole." This wasn't long ago. And my sister said, "Oh my God." She said, "If that happened to me, I wouldn't have been able to get out of bed for a week." I said, "Oh, Kate, that's a small, tiny island off Tahiti in the global map of my humiliations. I've learned to bounce back." But this was so hard to bounce back from, moving back to Adelaide. And I had to move in with my sister. And this isn't an attack on my sister. It's what happens to alcoholics, and what I want to tell you from the horse's mouth that I know happens. As much as they say they understand it's a disease, the anger is palpable. And it's anger for things, that were done within the context of drunkenness, which is a symptom of the disease of alcoholism. Now, I get that you need to say sorry and even more for the harm that you've done. We have to go to jail if we've made a mistake as shocking as drink driving and not gotten away with it. We cop it. But it's this underlying it feels like discrimination. And I think it is, to be honest. I was staying with my sister, and she'd said nothing rude to me. But this was shortly after I'd been in the coma and scared the life out of everybody. Well, they'd all said goodbye to me. I think I even had the priest do the, sacrament of see you later. But I was doing my very first gig, and it was a corporate gig, and it was a big deal. And it was the first one since the coma. And I had to be up at 6 for the taxi. The gig was in Sydney. And I walked out to the taxi, and I noticed my older sister follow me out there. And I just thought, oh, how sweet. She's come to say good luck or help me into the cab. But she's got the dressing gown around like this. And she said, "You've left the light on. You've left your bedside light on next to the table." And she said, "Are you going to turn it off?" And it was just the way I had to kind of meekly walk back in through her house, and turn off her light under this stern observation that I thought, hell, I think I'm going to be in for much more of this in my lifetime. Eventually, I had to find a way to save myself. I received the luckiest break of my alcoholic life when I met my manager, or a friend of mine decided to be my manager after I asked. And the most amazing thing happened. For the first time in my working life and my alcoholic life, we both were as committed as each other to put my sobriety before anything, before any gig, before any amount of money, before literally everyone and anything on planet Fiona. And we found a way to fill myself, and for a very long time, I'm still doing this, and it's been 16 months later that the success of dedicating myself to listening to 2 videos a day, watching YouTube twice a day, and just Googling a lived experience story, and that's key. In my work, I'm kind of melding my comedy with we're talking about my story, and even in that, you're healing yourself. It's night and day compared to what it was, and I look back now and I see clearly. I needed more love, not less. I needed no judgment. I needed the time and the space to really get to the bottom of everything that this disease means. And went so far as, well, Sue kicked my ass so far as to get every bit of me, looked over. If you're going to live, you may as well live well. So appointments were made from top to toe, and even that brought its own reward and solace, because finding out I had undiagnosed lifetime ADHD again set me free of an extraordinary amount of guilt. What I'll be doing for the rest of my life, with as many grandchildren as I'm lucky to get, is tell everyone I know from the start that alcohol is killer to alcoholics. That's the thing. It doesn't look dangerous because it's only dangerous to 10% of us. But it's as dangerous as cancer to that 10% of us. Why don't we know this? Why aren't we warning people of this? Why aren't we warning kids? I see a future where it's a given that the 90% of us that can drink with impunity have a regard, and certainly not soul, but some responsibility towards the 10% of us who have only those 10%, 1% seek help. And God knows how small the percentage of them finds sobriety. It's got to be taken as seriously as it is. And I'm really sorry, everybody, but you can't just wipe us, you can't just wipe us off as idiots just because we look like idiots when we're in a part of the disease that is a symptom, and that's drunkenness. And when we do it again and again and again until you're ready to rip our throats out, I'm sorry if it sounds like an excuse, but again, constant relapse or chronic relapse, again, is part of the illness. Thank you for listening.